Thank you very much for staying. As some of you know, what we do is after our the third Sunday performance, we have a symposium in which we talk about themes that are, that emerge from the play that we've just done. We often have scholars come in and talk about the play from their points of view. And who better to talk about this play since we are so blessed to have the double threat of the playwright and the actor here in New Haven with us. So he'll be out in just a second. I know you're waiting. Many of you know that Athol Fugard has had a long relationship with Longmore from the 1960s. We did what was among his very first plays in America, Sizzly Bonzi is Dead, and The Island. Some of you who are longtime subscribers may even remember that. Coincidentally, that was actually the first play that I ever saw of Athol's. My parents took me, when I was growing up on Long Island, they took me to that show in New York, and it made an indelible impression on me. And I couldn't have even dreamed that one day I'd be sharing, in a few moments, sharing a stage with Athol, be working with him in a rehearsal room. I don't think he's unfamiliar to any of you, but just a word, and I'll say this now because it'll embarrass him if I would say it in front of him. Athol Fugard is undeniably one of the great and most important living playwrights in the English language, period, end of story. No one would argue with that. And he is one of the few playwrights, one of the few writers, fiction writers, who you could actually say his work has changed the world. Athol is native South African. He's one half Afrikaner, one half English. He bore witness to the consequences of the apartheid regime in South Africa, which he grew up under. And his plays, which bore witness and told simple stories in a way. They were small, they were miniatures, but from those miniature canvases, bombs exploded. And Athol's work was among the very first work that we in the Northern Hemisphere, we in the Americas, first encountered apartheid and the consequences of apartheid on black and white. His story, he told stories of the consequences on the blacks as well as the whites. And we learned, many of us learned in flesh, because nothing puts flesh on a story like the theater. We learned in the flesh what apartheid might actually possibly feel like, but living in that country at that time would actually feel like. And I do believe it was one of the motivating factors for those of us in America to begin to think seriously about how we were responding to South Africa. He and several other writers, Hayden Gordimer, Kotze, and some others, but Athol was right there in the forefront. Athol was I think the first South African playwright to put a black man on stage with him. He was arrested because it was illegal to appear on the stage with for a black and a white to appear on stage. It was illegal. And Athol spent some time in jail. His passport was taken away. Perhaps we'll even tell that story when he gets out here. But Athol is, I don't know how many of us can look in the mirror and say that we've actually walked the walk as well as talked the talk. But Athol Fugard, with his entire life's work and the way he's lived his life, he has walked the walk as well as talking the talk. Over the past several years, those of you that are frequent Longmorphers know that we've done many of his plays. We've been unbelievably blessed. Athol and I have become, good friends as well as close collaborators. And beginning with Coming Home, which was about 5 years ago, we've done a series of premieres, Coming Home, and then Have You Seen Us, which starred Sam Waterston, and then Train Driver, and now this. We've been unbelievably fortunate to present 4 premieres of Athol's works. But he's chosen to make New Haven and Longmore Theater an artistic home for him. It's a gift that I hope you all agree is something very special for us. And now just vamping, waiting for Athol. Well, before we get started, you're really here to hear Athol, and I'll ask him a few questions. Do you have any questions for me before we begin regarding this play or Athol's work or the work with Athol? Yes, sir.
Are some of the excerpts in the play from his actual diaries?
The short answer to that question is yes. Athol keeps, he's kept a notebooks for probably 50 years. And in those notebooks are all kinds of things. They are notions for plays, as well as lists of birds he sees, which were early on in the play. They are, here he comes, Athol Fugard. Okay, I think, how can you top that? Maybe we'll do this without mics, you can hear us, right?
We need the mics for the recording.
Oh, we need the mics for the recording. The recording this is going into the House on Un-American Activities. This is going straight to Congress, because you're going to be brought up on charges for defiling a minor on stage.
Okay.
All right. So, so what was the impulse for this play? What was the impulse?
Well, it's a convergence, as it usually is in terms of any play that I've written. It's a convergence between a number of different things. I've often described the convergence as maybe the birth of an archipelago, where initially unrelated little peaks, if you're just looking at the surface of the sea, unrelated little peaks appear. One thought, another thought, an image from something back there, and then gradually, as the upheaval continues, they're eventually all joined together in a landscape. And the little peaks that began to appear with this one, well, I suppose the very first impulse comes from the fact that, when you're 82 years old, if you haven't started reckoning with the life you've lived, if you haven't started reckoning with the life you've lived, you'd better hurry up and start doing it. Because, how many years does anyone have after 82? I mean, Gordon has got a father who's going to celebrate his 100th birthday.
That's correct.
I'm not going to make that. This is a proof for your father. He must have been a good man and lived a good life. But so that was the first thing. At 82, you've got to start, to a certain extent, begin on your goodbyes, your expressions of gratitude. Because, at 82, if you're alive at 82, you've lived a blessed life. And believe me, I never deserved that blessing. There are many things that lie behind me that I'm not very proud of, very ashamed of. But anyway, so firstly that desire to look at the very opening line in the play. One of the opening lines is when Opa says, as I once heard a wise sage say, young man, the final landscape is within. And that's what I was doing. That's what I've got to start doing. Is start looking at my inner landscape and sorting out a few things. So that's one impulse. The next impulse is that amongst the great celebrations that continue in my life and so profoundly important to me, is that of my own grandson. I've got a grandson who is as old as Dermot, who you saw on stage with me tonight. And from the moment he was born, I saw him 2 hours after he'd been born in his mother's arms, and from that point on, when I saw this little thing in swaddling clothes or whatever you call it, he's become one of the big adventures in my life. One of the big adventures. We had a double show yesterday, and my daughter sent me a beautiful photograph of Gavin with his arms around, of all things, his dog. And the dog's name is Shadow. And he called that dog Shadow long before anybody knew about this play. But and I know that for as long as I live, I'm going to see him turn 10, hopefully, or 11, 12, 13. I might be lucky enough to see him into his teens. And that's going to be such an adventure for me. Such an adventure, because, as has already happened, I have seen him lose a measure of innocence, which is what this play is about. We do lose innocence, and then, but other balancing qualities come into life. And, so there's that. And then, what else? What else is there? I also wanted to just deal with my failure as a philosophy student at the University of Cape Town, when I couldn't make head or tail of what Plato was writing. Really is a bad story. But there was that. But I think most interesting of all is that I was writing this play, or not writing this play, I was busy writing a couple of years back in a little room in San Diego with an armchair in it, very much like the way that inspirational designer Eugene Lee has given me. And I was writing, the little room opened onto a small patio where I had a few South African plants growing to keep me company, and where I also had a few feeders hanging. One of them was a nectar feeder. And from that armchair, I couldn't see the nectar feeder. I had to be outside to see the nectar feeder. So I couldn't see anything visiting the nectar feeder. But one morning, I was busy writing on something, I forget what it was. Maybe one of the plays that you ended up doing here. And out of the corner of my eye, I caught a little activity on the wall in front of me. I was too late to really focus on it because it suddenly disappeared and it was gone. But the next day it was back there, and I was able to realize immediately what it was. It was the shadow of a hummingbird at my feeder. And I was enamored of it. And I also remembered that ages and ages ago, and literally it is in 1963, that I made an entry in my notebook about the extraordinary power of shadows and what they could mean, what they can mean. Very Jungian, of course. But anyway, and so it was all of this has finally led to the play, which Gordon read and said, come and do it. And here we are. And thank you for being here as well.
So what does it feel like to be actually doing it night after night? I mean, this is the first time Athol's been on the stage in nearly 15 years. He's acted in this material, throughout the history of your work. You've been acting in it, even appeared in a few movies, but you haven't acted in it.
I know, well, as the date for our appointment drew nearer, I thought to myself, God help Gordon, and please God, even more help for me, and I can't tell you how sweet the process was. It was and effortless, but then, it's like that between the two of us. It was just effortless in the rehearsal room. There were some very serious technical problems that we had to deal with. There were even issues in terms of the text that had to be dealt with. But we dealt with them, and we got, without any damage to our friendship, we got to a first preview. Thank you.
Well, what does it feel like? So, can you talk about, if you want, if you care to, talk about the experience leading up to that first preview for you, what it felt like? Getting ready to go on stage for the first time.
Firstly, I thought that that 15-year layoff, because I think it's been 15 or 12 years since I've been on the stage. I thought that would prove to be an encumbrance, because you know, acting is a very, very complex challenge. I mean, I know that as I was on the stage this evening, or this afternoon, sorry, as I was on the stage this afternoon, that my brain was correctly wired. And I've never realized that about myself as an actor, correctly wired to both examine the moment that had just passed, to stay rooted in the moment that is the actual living instant, and then to be also another part of my brain to be dealing with what's coming up. And that happened on the floor in the rehearsal room. I realized that maybe in those 15 years, because those 15 years are not a hiatus away from the stage. You know, I was busy directing other actors in plays of my own all through that period. And I realized that I had learned from them. I had actually learned from them. And that without being conscious of it, that what I understood and had learned informed me as we went into our first and then finally into our dress rehearsal and then into the preview. And you know, wow, yes, I've always loved the actors I've worked with, but this debt of gratitude to them for teaching me, it was like a summer school lasting 15 years. The craft of acting, you know, it's terrifying, you know. Outside there, where I wait for Gordon's assistant stage manager, or Jason's assistant stage manager, to say Jason is the stage manager, marvelous, magnificent man, sits up there in the booth. To come on, there's a little chair in a completely black cubicle, and I sit there, and I remember the first time I came out, I thought, this is the holding cell before the gallows. Because that is what it felt like. That is what it felt like. You know, and then, sure enough, Mitch, that is the name of the wonderful young assistant stage manager that looks after me, opens the door and says, "You're on, good luck." Something like that, I don't know. Will the drop be long enough? You know, well, you see, this relates to one of my greatest fears. If I have to identify the one way I don't want to die, it's by hanging.
Well, I'm sorry to inform you that's your sentence. But has it changed? Now you've been doing this now 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And the audiences have responded. I wasn't during the performance today, but I'm assuming this was a warm audience that appreciated the work. The audience response has been, you know, overwhelmingly positive for you here.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And so has it changed the experience of performing?
It's given me confidence. It's given me a lot of confidence, because, you know, I don't know if, as you sit in the audience, if you're ever conscious of how important your presence is to the actor on stage. You know, no two audiences are ever alike. It is, and in an amazing way, within the first few moments of being on a stage, all these separate identities that you vaguely see as your eyes go beyond the bright lights on you, become one personality. It's absolutely extraordinary experience. It finally becomes a question of not me relating to some people who don't laugh and some people who do laugh and some people who don't catch the joke. It becomes a question of a dialogue, a living dialogue. The instant in theatre is an intensely active audience dealing with hopefully intensely active actors on the stage. It is, you know, a moment that you only get in music, in a music concert hall or in a recital hall. You only get that sort of instant magic that's gone once you leave this theatre. Because the moment the curtain call comes, that one presence fractures out into all these individual faces that for the first time I can focus on and see. And so, does that answer your question?
more beautifully than the question was phrased. So, in the play, we see so many sides of you. It's interesting. We see Athol Fugard, the botanist. We see Athol Fugard, the ornithologist. We see Athol Fugard, the philosophy student, the failed philosophy. We see the lover of literature, the lifelong. But really, it's Athol Fugard, the playwright, that created this whole event. What, you know, there was so many things in your mind, so many things that have interested you in your life. As a young man, why did you turn to theater? Why did you turn to theater? Why did you, there were so many things you could have done, so many ways you could have expressed yourself. Why did you choose the theater?
Well, I tried other ways, but I never succeeded much in them. But the point about theatre is that, you know, I once made a rather, well, it might sound like a pompous statement if I make it now on this stage, but it's an actual entry in my notebook somewhere, is that the central arena in history, in the life of a nation, in the life of this world, in the life of whatever you want, the central event is one human being dealing with another human being. That moment where you are emphatically responsible for what you say and for what you do. Because, I mean, you're talking to somebody, you're relating, and I'm assuming that it is an arena of truth where that operates. Well, the nearest one gets to replicating that in terms of an art form that uses language is a theatre audience. I mean, admittedly, you suddenly magnify that one presence into a couple of hundred or whatever, maybe sometimes many hundreds. But that's what it, and it was that. And it's also about the power of language, living language in the mouth of people and men and women who try to both use language to tell their innermost truth and also use language to hide their innermost truth. And it's that interplay. It's an incredibly complex challenge writing a play. It's not like, and you know, I sometimes envy the novelist, you know. He writes a novel, or she writes a novel, or the poet, and they've got a book, and then they will have a relationship from that moment on with one reader at a time. You know, that's fabulous. That's really amazing. Maybe I should invent a form of theatre Gordon for one person. Will you sponsor that?
Yes, I will.
Okay, anyway.
What was the, so, but specifically, I mean, in South Africa when you were growing up, there wasn't a lot of theater to see, was there?
No, no.
What was your first exposure?
My first real exposure was when, interestingly enough, was when at the age of 20, I, with a very crooked walking stick, walked onto the stage as an 82-year-old shepherd in Oedipus Rex. And as one critic said, you know, he should have taken lessons from that stick that he was leaning on. And
so you started out as an actor, so really your first way in was as an actor?
No, I'd already been interested in it because even in the remote, you know, as provincial and as cut off from anything that really happening in terms of the world as Port Elizabeth, where I grew up, one or two plays that land up on the stage of the City Hall every year, and I think, I'm just going to find the right words for it. I'm a show-off. And being on stage is showing off. Simple as that, showing off. I mean, good actors show off the right things. They show off their understanding of a truth or whatever. And but I can also remember a marvelous remark Peter Brook once made to me. I'm sure you all know the name. He's wonderful. Director of Genius from the Royal Shakespeare Company in England. And we were talking, he'd just come out of a rehearsal of a Shakespeare play, he scratched his head and he said, you know, Athol, he said, how does it work? He said, you know, I direct these very gifted actors and they play Lear, Hamlet, Lady Macbeth, or Clytemnestra in the Aristophanean cycle. He said, but they learn nothing from it. And, you know, you don't actually walk away from the stage with any wisdom, you know. That's Peter Brook.
I'm kind of stopped by that. So, I know people are wondering about the notebooks that you read from, and I think they're also wondering about the literature that you reference in the play. You want to talk about, before you came out, somebody asked me about the notebooks, and I was describing to them that you've been keeping notebooks for 50 years?
Yes. Can I just take a moment just to introduce Paula Fugard, who actually wrote the prelude to the play. And Paula enlisted, and they were very generous, the cooperation of the Lilly Library in Indiana University, where my papers and my notebooks are kept. And what was that journey like?
The journey of doing the notebooks?
Yes.
Well, it's very strange to know someone fairly well, quite well, and then to suddenly have access to all their private thoughts of the past 50 years. You know? And that was certainly a very strange journey. You know, knowing...
Have you gotten over it yet?
I don't know. I mean, I'm actually toying with the idea of bringing out a second volume of Athol's edited notebooks. The last one ended in 1978, and that's sort of an open challenge, and I don't know if I've really grabbed it yet. You know, it takes you to places where you sometimes don't want to go. But at the same time, Athol's notebooks are quite meditative. Like they humble me as a young person. I'll read about 60-year-old Athol who says, oh, I went for my first 10-mile jog this week, and I ate up the tarmac like a strip of licorice. I don't think I've ever run a mile in my life. And just learning how Athol has quietly stuck to his craft, the discipline, the anguish he goes through in staying up nights trying to write something. It's really a lesson in focus and in almost meditating on what you're trying to write. Of course, it was a huge challenge to do the prologue in the first place, because what you're dealing with is a surplus of really, really beautiful, useful, shocking text that he's written, and to whittle that down to, I think the initial mandate was about 15 minutes. Now, it went over that by about 10. But to choose notebook entries that would accurately... I come from an academic background. I just wrote a biography about someone, so I think I've got a very large respect for written sources and material to have integrity towards that. But at the same time to realize that I was writing essentially fiction, and that Opa is not Athol. But at the same time that he is in certain other ways. And that involved a large degree of editing in terms of removing names and places, so as not to point directly at Athol, but to keep the integrity of the entries. Also not to include entries that are about writing or about acting, but that are about experiencing the world and to a limited sense about people that are important to him and experiences. Thanks.
Where were we? Oh, yeah, so we were asking about the... No. We're asking about the notebooks. So the question came up, and I answered it. Are the notebooks that you read accurate representations of the notebooks that you've written?
Well, firstly, they are literally verbatim quotes from the notebooks, but I've got a theory about the presence of the notebooks in this play now. It's taken me some time to get there, George. Gordon, but George. Well, but my theory is that this Opa character that we've been looking at, you know, actually stumbled on or somehow managed to get hold of Athol Fugard's notebooks, and that he has adopted that persona.
He's pretending to be.
He's pretending to be me.
I can try to answer that question just by giving one or two examples. Before the 2012 notebook entry, there was a 4 and a name, and that just got cut, the name. Also, All of Me is now finally back home on the ashram, and in tune with the powerful rhythms of... No, it was the other way around. All of Me is now finally back home in Port Elizabeth, and in tune with the simple but powerful rhythms of the ashram, which is Athol's house in Port Elizabeth, the old house. So that became the scrubby coastline.
So the answer to your question is that yes and no. Yes, in basic substance, and
yes.
they've been slightly altered in order to and edited to fit into the drama. But as I was describing to them, Athol, you kept notebooks, and your notebooks contain everything from lists of birds
yes.
to sketches for beginnings of plays.
Yes.
They have everything. It really. And have you continued to keep notebooks?
Oh yes, yes. Well, as soon as this run ends in 2 weeks, about 2 weeks' time, I think it will be on a Sunday in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I will see what's next in my appointment book, and I've already got a sense of what it is going to be. I won't talk about it, but I think I know what it's going to be, and already I have a little moleskin notebook which has got notes in it as they come to me, the little points in the archipelago I mentioned earlier, that come pulling together from various corners of my life. Yeah, so I keep them, addictive notebook keeper.
The set, on the set are books, as you see, and we've done our best. I asked Athol about 6 months ago, as Eugene Lee and I were preparing the set, to send me a list of his favorite books, because I wanted them on the stage. You wouldn't necessarily know that, but I wanted to create a home for him on the set, and I think we succeeded to a certain extent.
No, Eugene Lee, he's a legendary designer, and together with the team from the prop shop here at the Longwall Theatre, Jackie and her assistant Frank, they have, I honestly, when I step out of that door, I don't see the gallows anymore now. I step into a warm space where I live.
Right.
Yes.
So to talk about, what are the great influences, when you read from, what are the great literary influences? Some of them you reference in the play, some are on your shelves. What are the books that have meant the most to you? Your life has been so much books. What are the books that have meant the most to you?
Tolstoy, first and foremost. And one particular novel, Resurrection, which is about regeneration. It's about that. A life where that seemed to have been wasted, suddenly being confronted by something that makes him turn a corner. Yeah, Tolstoy. And then Albert Camus, the French philosopher. Eclectic from every corner. At the moment I'm into the first volume of Simone de Beauvoir's memoirs.
I think these people don't know that the collection you were reading about love towards the very end of the play is from Tolstoy's War and Peace.
Yeah.
Why was there a reason why you didn't, the two major quotations in the play, from Blake, the poem, people recognize that poem from Blake? We talk about the Blake and the Tolstoy to them. Speak a word about that to them, because they figure prominently in the play.
Tolstoy is, what is she?
I don't know.
Oh, Tolstoy is about the, and I can't believe that I sort of saw it so early in my life. Though, was it a presentiment of the life that I was going to live that would need some sort of rebirth finally, or I don't know, but it was resurrection, and that sort of made me very aware of how crooked the journey through a life can be, because my journey through my life was a crooked one. There is a marvelous Russian proverb, To live a life is not to cross a field. There's no stop running, you know, you have to go all over and all over. And then the Blake, there is that extraordinary image of innocence, of seeing the world in a way that, you know, our educated, over-educated heads can't see it anymore. I still brush moments like that. I still encounter brief little intimations of the ability to actually see the world in that way. And yeah, and I suppose it's about innocence and redemption. Redemption is the word I was looking for. Yeah, Tolstoy is about redemption. Blake is about innocence, and this old man, Opal, he needs redeeming. He sure does. And there is an instance in the lovely performance Dermot gave tonight of innocence. And yeah, that's it.
I think we have some questions.
I'll bring up my.
I think please speak into the microphone. And then
what do you see as the contrast between playwrights who don't act and playwrights who are actors?
what's the contrast between playwrights who act and playwrights who don't act? Interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, obviously you must be thinking of Pinter as well, Harold Pinter.
There aren't that many playwrights who acted. Shakespeare, of course, was an actor, and Moliere was an actor, and had their own acting companies. They were both lead actors. And Harold Pinter was an actor first. Both Moliere and Shakespeare were actors first before they were writers, as was Harold Pinter. But there aren't that many. I will say that actors love being in Athol's plays. They're so actor-friendly. And what I mean by that is he writes things that human beings actually do. Some playwrights, brilliant playwrights, they write theoretical situations. They don't write real situations. Athol, because he understands the challenges of an actor, he writes situations. Some of them are very difficult. I mean, I don't think there's been an actor that's ever been in Master Harold who hasn't had a hard time spitting in that man's face. That is a difficult thing to do. Nonetheless, that's a real situation. And Athol writes incredibly actable real situations, which I can tell you as someone who spent his life directing plays, it's not always the case. And this is, I think part of his gift as a dramatist, but I have to believe it's also his understanding of acting.
Yeah,
I think that's true, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you first very much for this afternoon, but for your body of work. A very short backstory to my question. In the school year of 1980-81, my family was given the gift of an exchange student, Jill Moody, whose parents, Frank and Carol, were very supportive of anti-apartheid efforts. And I believe Jill's closeness with your daughter when they were in school together was something that she carried with her as a wonderful memory. Your work formed a very interesting bridge between a teenage South African girl and a Fairfield family. And we spent a lot of time reading some of your works together and discussing you in absentia. One of the things that we could not find in your work to that date, and we knew of the facts of your life, obviously, was fear. And this is obviously, I felt would have been a very reasonable reaction to the years of banning or much of the rest of what you experienced. And Jill and I made each other a promise that whichever one had the opportunity perhaps to meet you first would ask the question, was there fear during that time that didn't appear in your work? Either of your external circumstances or of many of the facts that you portrayed. And if there was that fear in your real life, as someone who currently is facing change and fear, how did you do that? How did you continue to create? How did you continue to function?
In an environment of fear. Is that the question? Now, firstly, let me say that I appreciate your question very much, because fear was a very, very present reality in my years as I grew up in South Africa, because thanks to the incredible influence of a magnificent mother, I had my eyes open to the fact that something was rotten in the state of Denmark very early on, that something was wrong in South Africa. My mother, a very simple woman, almost illiterate peasant from the Karoo, an Afrikaner, nevertheless was endowed with a sense of natural justice. And this led her to start to ask questions about the world in which we were living. And she shared those questions with me and shaped my thinking. So that's point number one. Point number two is, you must understand that, and I don't say this for anyone to suddenly sort of jump on me and try to say, no, that's not true. I'm not a brave man. I am by no means a brave man. Whether it's a question of walking into a dentist where I know the hypodermic needle's going to go into my gums, I start quaking with fear, or whether it was to face police interrogation in South Africa. I mean, all of those instances frightened me. But there was one overriding factor which somehow managed to get me past all of those moments of fear, cowardice maybe even, though I don't think I've ever done it. Well, I don't know. But anyway, and that overriding factor was that my sense that in a situation like South Africa, where the draconian laws of the apartheid regime were doing everything that could to stifle thought and speech in South Africa, having the gift of a small gift with language made it imperative that I use that gift and speak so that people could hear what should not be said. It was as simple as that. There is a moral obligation on writing in situations, and you can't find a clearer instance of lives lived in terms of that moral obligation in Russia, where during the Stalinist period, I mean, those writers were extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary in the way they gave voice to protest, to challenge, always challenging. And for me in South Africa, I experienced a small measure of that having that gift and having discovered the fact that a stage, a space, even if it is just a space in a garage, because sometimes we gave performances of plays in garages for 4 or 5 black domestic servants. You actually were rupturing and breaking through that suffocating silence, that conspiracy of silence that the apartheid regime created. Does that answer your question, ma'am? Thank you.
Who would you like to see play this part that you played today?
Who would you like
Other
to
than
see?
yourself.
Who would you like to see play the part after you? Yeah.
Good God, why, as Gordon told you, he's going to replace me.
You can ask Brook if you don't behave yourself, we might.
Who would I like to see play this part?
Ronald Reagan's not available. So. Ronald Reagan's not available.
No, I think Ian McKellen would do a good job. I think he would do a good job.
I'll call him tomorrow. Yes.
Well, I got the mic, so I guess I got the power.
Oh, I didn't see. Okay, yes.
That's all right. I'll give the mic back. I wondered, as you were constructing the play, whether you considered another ending than the one that we saw.
Did you hear the question? The question is, had you considered another ending?
I think that if you have a look at the play as on sale, I think the PCG volume is on sale now, and if I remember correctly,
yeah, you do.
That play has got a different ending.
Slightly different ending. We played the ending. If you're asking the question about Opa's death, you didn't ask the full question you meant. The question really was, did you ever consider not having Opa die at the end?
Oh, is that your question?
Yes.
Not having Opa die. Well, what the hell did you do? Oh, what should you do?
I think that's the way everybody ends, as far as I can tell. But to give you a little peek into the process, and this is something that many people who aren't involved in making theater wouldn't know, is particularly making theater with a living playwright, and a living playwright as generous and as open as Athol. And I'm not just saying this because he's here. The ending, as he says, the ending in the script that you would buy out there is different than the one you saw tonight. Not substantially different, but somewhat different.
Yes.
And it evolved in rehearsal. Much of what you see on the stage, I mean, the play was the play, absolutely. But there are many things on the stage tonight that you wouldn't find in the script because it evolved in rehearsal. Athol would suggest something, I would suggest something, stage manager Jason would suggest something, Paula would suggest something. It's a conversation, all towards making the best show possible for you. It's a living organism, and Athol, as a playwright, as an actor, knows that.
You see, I mean, the heart of theatre, and this is what is so extraordinary about it, and I don't know if there's any other art form that has that at its core as much as theatre does. I don't actually think so. And that is collaboration. The event you saw tonight, involves, costumes designed by Susan Hilferty, a brilliant set designed by Eugene Lee, and then, coming, and sound and lights, and it's all of us working together. And in the best scenarios, we subordinate our personalities to the demands of something bigger than any one of us. There is actually, in true theatre, ego is out. Unfortunately, so many instances nowadays, it is all about the ego. It's about the director's ego, or it's about the leading man's ego, or this or that. But in theatre such as Long Wharf practices, it's a collaborative process in which every voice is listened to, understood, and either valued for its contribution, but never dismissed or silenced, pushed aside. And that's the theatre I grew up in, or made for myself in South Africa, and that's what I know the theatre that Gordon practices.
Is there an inner conflict between Fugard the actor and Fugard the writer to be directed by Gordon Edelstein?
Is there an inner conflict between Fugard the actor and Fugard the playwright to be directed by Gordon Edelstein? We fought all the time.
Is there any conflict?
Was there a conflict amongst those three?
No, I haven't really encountered that or experienced that.
No, I mean, theoretically there could be. Let's just say in certain situations, there are certain playwrights who are famously, I don't want to say necessarily difficult, but persnickety about every semicolon. Famously, he would, I mean, I'm not saying, Edward Albee is a brilliant writer. I mean, not one of the great living writers. I mean, one of the few that are Athol's peers, living peers. But Edward Albee doesn't let you change a comma. And he only will hire, he has to have approval of director and actor, even today, of any production of his in the country. Athol is not, Athol is a different kind of animal. So, I mean, that's just, you know, that's the truth of it. Otherwise, you know, Athol is truly a practical man of the theater.
Well,
understands the practical.
Yeah, the point also is that I don't know about Edward, who I respect enormously, and other writers, but for myself, the play which I finally hand over to Gordon or whoever else wants to give it its first preview or first airing is the mandate for an event. The final event is not that piece of paper with words on it. It lies beyond that. It's when we all get together, when the designers, the actors, the technicians all get together and we start working towards the event that we try to share with you this afternoon. The event on the stage in the presence of a living audience.
Having said that, when Athol would not be here, because I think buried in your questions, when Athol was in South Africa or San Diego, on other plays that I've done of his, I wouldn't change a comma. I would not change, I wouldn't make an and, a but. I would not do it without his permission. And we're on constant communication. I kind of have a sense of the things that he would not object to, but I would never, ever touch a thing. And just because it's a living organism doesn't mean the playwright's words are not sacred, because I believe they are. It may sound like it's a paradox, but they're both true.
One more.
We'll finish up, I guess, last question.
At the very end, when Oprah was passing away, did you plan to have the multicolored lights that depict the way Americans, or the way we think of dying, where you see the lights?
The question was, just prior to Oprah's death, did you imagine a lighting effect as we had
that
it?
Is written into
multicolored effect, yeah.
That exists on paper.
Yes. That's the lighting designer's interpretation of what Athol wrote. Athol describes
An
event quite like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It's an interesting explosion at the end, isn't it? Unexpected. Very unexpected. In a play that is so simple in a way, right? Well, let me just thank you all for coming today. Thank you for coming to Long Wharf, and please join me one more time.